Well, hey, everybody, welcome into the Real Talk podcast. My name is Erik Swanson. I'm the Morris campus pastor, and I'm here with...
I'm Arol McFadden. I'm the Minooka campus pastor.
And we're glad that you joined in, whether you're watching this live or catching up with it some other time. We just take a time out for a quick discussion and kind of look back at the sermon from last week. We typically prepare together, present separate, live at both locations. And so this is just a chance for us to talk about how it went, what landed, what missed the cut, things like that. And hopefully you can listen in and glean some anything helpful as we go. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
So this last week, the topic was church.
Church.
How'd you feel about it?
I felt great about it. And we were talking about how certain pastors have different insecurities with regard to, I really have to preach on this subject, but I hate to preach on it because it feels so self-serving.
Yeah.
We talked about that being giving. A lot of pastors are skittish about because it sounds self-serving. It doesn't. It could be easily manipulated. And church attendance is another one where it feels like, hey, we want you guys to be biblical, so start showing up to our church, you know, all the more.
You got to come all the time.
Yeah, and we were talking about how, like, with regard to giving messages, you got zero issues with those.
Well, I realize everyone thinks that church is talking about giving to, oh, of course you talked about giving. My friend finally came for the first time.
Yeah.
Or every time I visit a new church, all the church wants is my money, But yeah, I feel more, I'm more aware of how self-serving it sounds when we speak about, being involved at church and attending regularly, that even than I am with giving. I don't feel bad talking about it. But I realize it sounds very self-serving. It's kind of like if you invite your neighbors to church, which I know we both do. We both have tried to be people that invite people. And when you're on staff at a church, it sounds like people think you're like getting commission or something, right? Like, like some door-to-door salesman trying to drum up business. So my favorite time was I was a youth pastor for a while. Then I was not in professional ministry for about 2 years. And we just went to a church. We were very involved. It was awesome. But I loved inviting people to church those 2 years. Because apart from those 2 years, my whole adult life, I've been on staff at a church. I've been a pastor.
Yeah.
And when you invite an unchurched person to church and they realize that you're a pastor, they're like, what do you get out of this?
Yeah.
And so I think I am more aware even than the giving talk of talking about how funny it could seem when the pastor is telling people to go to church or to get involved at their church, as if it's, because we need it or because it drums up business or something like that.
Yeah. I think what you feel, the enthusiasm you feel about talking about giving because you've seen the benefit. Like for me, that's the church attendance one. Like there's no qualms with that for me because it's I think that both because we live in an area where there's a lot of people that they're going to come and they're going to work at ComEd or Caterpillar or some other, corporation in our area. And then in 5 years or so, they're going to move on. Or, Illinois is such a state where lots of people move out. That I feel like I want to make sure that we're equipping people with this perspective on church because wherever they end up, I hope that they're faithfully living this out there, but certainly that they can get the start on it here. So I'm just someone who's grown up in church life my whole life. It's always been a part of my existence. And so I've seen the benefit and man, I love to share that. And it breaks my heart when I see people missing the point on that or missing out on what it could afford them.
For me, even as a youth pastor, it was easier because I'd be telling kids that are coming to youth group, they need to go to church. I felt like I was, sending them to something that's not like me focused or my sphere of, leadership exactly. And so now actually, doing big church, it's like, hey, you need to come here. You need to get involved here. And but I believe in it. And I had to remind myself that idea of a moral authority, this is not empty words coming from a place of I have to say this. This is, I've given my life to the local church.
Yeah.
We've moved our family. We're all in. And I want everybody just to be invested and feeling like they're called. So you were doing something a little different with our two messages. If you want to check out the Minooka video or Spotify link, you can hear the audio or video. But you decided to talk about the topic, kind of talking to high school students, knowing that everyone else was listening. How did you feel? How'd that go?
I think that it went better on Sunday than Saturday. Our tech director, Benji Sartorius, told me that it totally fell flat on Saturday. He was like, that was a miss. And what we do after every Saturday service is we talk about what landed, what didn't. And it's super helpful. One of the things that Benji said is, I think that if you're talking to high school students, you're alienating naturally everyone else in the room. And that's a really good point. My pushback to that was, I'm going to alienate everyone in the room if I do it wrong. The reason that I wanted to speak on a message that everyone can apply, but I wanted to specifically have at the tip of the spear of the high schoolers, is because God's doing something really cool where there's all of these high schoolers who are showing up faithfully. Like every single week, they're waking up and they're going to church. And in a lot of situations, they're bringing their parents, and several of them are coming against the better wishes of their parents. Their parents are not fans of the fact they're going to church. They don't understand, why are you doing this? And so I wanted to honor that amazing commitment and just say, let's keep doing that. And let's all keep doing that. And go from the angle of, how do you be someone who's going to go into your 18, 19, 20 years of age, and then into your 20s and 30s and 40s, and keep maintaining this momentum and commitment that you have right now, and then also just kind of like overlaying that on the rest of the congregation. Like, this is what we all need to be stepping into. So I loved how it landed on Sunday.
Oh, good.
Benji was right that it was way more flat on Saturday, and I think that was more in my delivery than anything else. But it was helpful to tweak it a bit on how I communicated that for Sunday.
Well, I just imagine an adult of any age, especially a parent, or a grandparent,
right,
hearing that and thinking through a kid's perspective, through a future-looking perspective, whether that's I wish I got on board sooner, or that's great advice. I think there is a way that the audience can lean into that at any age, even though you're kind of saying it with that perspective. So
yeah, I think it did. So if you came to Mission Minooka on Sunday and it was just absolutely a disconnect, just tell Benji he was right.
So what did you feel like hit home? As we talk about church and, kind of each week with this series, we've kind of looked at what we call world wisdom, of things that we're seeing through scientists or studies or whatever, experts, and how that kind of points us back to God's wisdom. And so kind of from both sides of that equation, how'd you feel about what sunk in?
One thing for me, and I think this is something that I had in my sermon slides, I don't think you did, but it was just the difference between your commitments being driven by motivation versus discipline. If my commitment to anything...
I actually got really excited to put that into my notes, but then I didn't stick to it.
You weren't motivated enough? But I mean, if our decisions are based off of our motivation, which most of them are, I'm doing this because I'm enthusiastic about it. I'm doing this because I really believe in this right now. Whatever it is, whether it's a sport that you're on, a sports team that you're on, your marriage, your work, your workout routine, your diet, whatever it is, whatever we're committed to based on motivation, we will break our commitment. Because our motivation is high at the beginning when we're most enthusiastic, but as soon as life happens, distractions happen, or disappointments happen, our motivation tanks. And if our commitment is based on that, it's over. And that's what a lot of people experience with church. Man, I became a Christian, or I got invited to this church. Man, I'm feeling God do amazing things, and the motivation is high. But as life happens, as distractions happen, as people disappoint, churches disappoint, something else is more exciting, our motivation and our commitment tanks. Versus discipline, which is that on the graph, it was just this like perpetual, just week after week, I'm just making the same decision, not exclusively because I'm excited to do so right now, or I'm motivated to do so right now. I'm doing it even in times I'm not motivated, because this is who I am, or this is what I'm committed to. And so...
And a belief.
And a belief,
that
right.
It does matter.
It does.
Even if it doesn't always feel magical.
And so it's like, just using the sport as an analogy, if you have a discipline that says, I'm showing up to practice every week, I'm showing up to the games every time, I'm learning through all this, there's going to be sections and seasons of that season where you're absolutely not enthusiastic. You're demoralized, you don't want to be there, you don't think that this is a great fit, but you keep showing up. And it's only by pushing through that wall of lack of motivation through discipline that on the flip side of that, you look back and say, oh my gosh, I would have never seen the wins. I would have never seen the victories. I would have never seen the transformation in me had I tapped out when my motivation tanked. And so just that correlation with church, if you do church for life, your motivation will tank for a myriad of reasons.
And wax and wane.
Totally wax and wane. Sometimes more wax and wane. I don't know which one's the
I don't either, yeah. The moon does it.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Do you guys know what waxing or waning is? Which is the stronger of the two? We don't know what waxing or waning.
I think you wax on and
then you wane off. Yeah. So anyway, all that to say, that's like for me such a huge part of why it's so important to have a different outlook for church that is not based on my enthusiasm or my motivation, because I know as a human being that's going to go up and down. It's going to wax and it's going to wane. But the reality is that I'm a part of the Church of Jesus because that's who I am, and I'm going to make that decision, that disciplined decision based on that.
Yeah, I'm glad you felt like that really hit home too.
Yeah,
cool.
I heard some people talk, even since today I was
super relatable.
Event. Yeah, it was neat just to hear that.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that I felt just, you kind of feel like in the room or through comments afterwards. And one was the Dawkins quotes that we had.
Yeah.
Here's a guy that's kind of given his life. I shouldn't say it that strongly, but
no.
He doesn't believe in God.
He's
basically against Christianity as a practice because, or as a belief system, because he believes it's phony. But then he comes out all these years into basically this professional atheistic career saying, oh, I'm sad to see the church go.
Yeah.
I'm sad to see us lose the Judean Christian values that have made the culture what I love. Those quotes are really
He spent 24 years, the last 24 years, telling people that belief in Jesus is dumb and being a part of the church is goofy. And then he said, I love the part of the quote where he said, I find it to, the culture, our culture loses when belief in Christ and participation in the church goes down. That was astounding. Yeah, there's like an audible gasp when people saw that in Manuka. And that was just,
When I first read that, I just thought that was so telling.
Yeah.
And
that was
amazing.
That was just this year.
Then I was waiting for the next paragraph to be like, and that day he prayed to receive Jesus.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
I've been praying for Richard for 24 years. Like he's like he's converted so many people, deconverted so many people to atheism from some faith system that I just feel like, honestly, there's just things that he's been saying that I feel like God's working on his heart. So pray for Richard Dawkins.
The other thing I felt like I know kind of hit home for some people, because a few people have talked to me about it, was I said something that I felt right about, but I didn't want to sound like a guilt trip. I hate guilt trips. I never want to be that.
Yeah.
But I just kind of said, and I think you might have made the same point in Manuka, that your kids might not remember every time they won't remember every time you go to church, but they will remember the times when you don't.
Yeah.
And they'll remember why and what you did instead. And I had kids tell me that's true. I can't remember why we did. I had adults saying they can remember as kids, and just it kind of just makes you realize, I love the idea. Like, I go to church for myself. I go to church for the church.
Right.
But as a parent, there's a responsibility to raise my kids with healthy habits and that discipline for life. And so I was really glad that people were like, oh, that kind of that grabbed my attention. That made sense.
Well, I shared that in Manuka as well. I didn't quote you with it. I should have quoted you on that, because that was Eric's quote. It was so good. But it's just such a very clear, absolute reality that those times that we skip, our kids are recording. And our kids are going to have an abundance of excuses not to make church a part of the core of their life. And we just add to that list whenever we've skipped. It's like, oh, it's too nice, or we got, it's kind of busy, or we've had a long weekend.
Yep.
And whatever that is, our kids will take that and run with it.
Yeah. I don't know if this directly relates, but I remember a professor at Bible college talking about, different things that you model. This is students preparing to be youth pastors. And he's not telling us all the decisions to make. But like, do you drink or not drink, or how do you teach on that if it's a gray, and just all those different kinds of things. And he just said, you got to realize that what you do in moderation, your students might do in excess. And I remember that really sunk in. Not in a way to feel like, oh, I got to be perfect, or their faith is on my shoulders, but to realize what I model as a pastor, as a parent, as a friend, as a leader, in all those areas that is being noticed, and it will be replicated, if not escalated, because, boy, I'm going to remember those, and then I'll always have that feeling. I'll always go back to that, So one thing that we try to do is say, what missed the cut. Some weeks it's like, oh, I had 4 sermons, I had to cut a lot. Sometimes I was like, oh, that's what I had. But was there anything that you were like, oh, we really didn't get this one squeezed in?
Yeah, for me, this was a small piece, and I wanted to say this right before communion, but there's a pastor and author named John Mark Comer, and he talked about how one of the amazing things in church life, or one of the things in life, is that we have a very busy life. The world is constantly going and going and going. How was that? Was it good?
Delicious.
Delicious. Here. Constantly going, constantly harried, perpetually just going. And on top of that, we don't stop. He says the church, that weekly gathering is a time where all of a sudden you stop and you get to just quiet yourself around God's word, singing to God. And it's this reset point in the week where all the busyness and the stress and anxiety of life can just hit pause. And you can just spend time with God and his people, and how significant that is. You can have great times with God in a quiet time. You could pray to God, and you should pray to God all throughout the week, but there's something about that weekly gathering that God has designed for us just to stop.
Yeah.
And just to take a breath.
I thought it was neat and really scheduled by accident that we were talking about the church and being engaged on the week that we were celebrating communion. Just because that's something that Jesus told us to do when we gather.
Yeah.
And so we're practicing one of these, sacraments, if you want to call it that, to on the day that we're celebrating and discussing how big of a deal it is.
Did we do that on purpose?
Well, kind of.
I kind of think that was a genius then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was kind of accident, kind of. We recognized it and liked it.
Yeah.
And left it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that worked out really well. Praise the Lord for that.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that for me was just was big, and this is something that came out of my small group. I love how like on the website we've had these small group questions that are follow up. How do I apply this in my life? On Tuesday morning in my small group that I'm a part of, we were talking through this, and we were getting to that Hebrews passage that we studied as a church, and we just landed on it heavier than I did in the sermon. In Hebrews 10:24 and 25, it says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing." But then it's like you need to show up. But then it gives us what we're doing when we show up. It's not like don't like skip church, but show. Some people are in the habit of skipping. Don't be that person. It doesn't say show up, because there's lots of volunteer things that need to be filled, or you can get so much out of the sermon if you show up. Or, man, the music is going to be just on point this week. It doesn't say any of those things. It says, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. And all the more as you see the day approaching. And the thing that I love about that is that if I'm showing up and I don't have any volunteer roles to play out on that particular weekend, I have a role that every single week I'm supposed to step into, and that is to be an encourager. And I so wish I would have spent more time, or would have spent any time on that. If every person showed up and said, I've got a whole lot that I'm receiving today. I'm going to receive sermon, scripture. I'm going to receive music. I'm going to receive free coffee. But one thing that I'm bringing to this equation, according to Hebrews 10:25, is I'm here to encourage at least one person. And if every person who showed up at church, or even 90% of people who showed up at church, came with that outlook, I'm coming here to give, not just receive, and I'm coming to give encouragement, can you imagine how people would leave that congregation? How tightly they would feel connected to the body of Christ? Because this is in a world of discouragement, this is the place where I'm receiving encouragement every single weekend.
And that we have a part to play in it.
Yes.
So it did work well to say, our theme for the year for our church is we need us.
Yeah.
That, there's no we without you and me. So we're the church when we're not together.
Yeah.
But we gather as the body of Christ. And if we taught that passage and sold short, if all we said was, you're supposed to go to church, then we're just teaching people to check a box.
Yeah.
But to say, no, we participate in worship, and we expect that God will not only speak to us, but speak through us and use us as we, the idea of fellowship is a big part of a Sunday morning, not just worship.
Right.
That we're going to have fun together, we're going to encourage each other. And then I always think of the Apostle Paul. in Romans, he says something that I've always found crazy. So he's writing this book, and the Apostle Paul's like the greatest Christian that ever lived, I think. He's my hero. I can't wait to meet him. And he's writing to this church, and he's like, oh yeah, I want to come visit you, like pen pals. But he says this, I long to see you, this is Romans chapter 1, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to make you strong. And that's verse 11. And that makes sense. Like, he's got wisdom to give them, encouragement, challenge. He's going to like teach them up, And then he says in the next verse, that is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. And that's always really hit me. Like, if the Apostle Paul says, I'm going to be encouraged by your faith when we get together, how much more can I be encouraged by anyone else's faith? He's Paul, he's writing books of the Bible. He's inventing churches. He's like super Christian. And he's like, I can't wait to get together.
That means
we're
something to him.
We're going to encourage each other. And same thing, if we all saw our churches that way, any church that anyone's a part of.
Yeah, I think that even I think about people that are new to a church. They're walking in, and if you're a Christian and you're walking into church, and you're like, I don't have a friend group here already built in. I'm looking at the fellowship that's happening. People are talking with each other. I'm not having those conversations yet. I still have something that I'm bringing to the table because I still have the ability to encourage someone that's around me, someone that's in the row before around me or that I talk to at getting coffee or whatever. It's like if I stayed home, I could say I shouldn't stay home because I'm going to get something out of this. True. But if I stayed home, for sure, I'm not just cheating myself. I'm cheating somebody else out of this very thing that God's called me to do in the life of other people when we gather. And that's just massively important.
Yeah. We almost always we have like a greeting time inside of our service. And that's not just an old tradition. We want people to make friends at church.
Yeah.
And we want them to find community at church. And that's just one little part of how that can happen. But I just want to encourage you, if you're watching, when we do that at church, whether it's a person you never met before or the people that you sit with every weekend, add to your repertoire during that moment of saying, I'm glad you came today. That you can say, nice to meet you, or how was your week, or whatever else. But for someone else to hear you say, I'm glad, for you to hear that from anyone else, whether it's like you're a hero or a stranger, I want our church to be good at saying, man, I'm glad you're here. Because I want us to really feel that.
Yeah.
And the more we say it, the more we'll realize it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Last thing I was thinking to ask you was, what this topic, this sermon, what kind of questions have you heard because of it, or do you just kind of expect are buzzing around? What does it kind of bring up?
One good question that came out of our small group time was, this is all about being involved in church and making that something that's you're faithfully disciplined to be connected to. And the question was, well, can you be too committed? Can you be too involved in church? And I think that's a great question. Because on one side, you're like, oh man, it's like, can I be too close to God? Can I be too obedient to Jesus?
Can I get too much church?
Right. Yeah. So the answer is no on that level. But I would say if church means I'm showing up at this location, so in Manuka, I'm showing up at 412 North Wabena, or in Morris, I'm showing up at Saratoga School, and I'm just like there all the time. If I'm plugged into ministries, and I'm not only at church, I'm at multiple services because I'm serving. I'm not only in a Bible study, I'm in 3. I'm so plugged in. If you are so connected to church activities that you're not rubbing shoulders with non-believers, or you're slighting the connection with your family, or the people that are in your circle that God's called you to be someone that's loving and participating in life with, journeying alongside, if those things are dying on the vine because you're overcommitted, then I would say you need to pare that back. I think that there's definitely that weekly gathering. That's something that we should be a part of, no question. I think that at our church, we really encourage people to be a part of a weekly gathering, be a part of a small group, and be part of some type of a serve opportunity. If you start to duplicate and multiply those on out, that you've whittled away all your extra time, where you don't have time for God, you don't have time for your family, and you don't have time for lost people, then you're overcommitted.
Yeah, and we talk about seasons of life too.
Yeah, true.
You might be more or less involved in certain things. I got little kids or whatever. There's some guys that are here, feels like full time.
Yeah.
Because now they've retired.
Yeah.
They're empty nesters. They've got time to serve, whether that's with facilities or just with different ministries, and they're like, hey, I'm glad right now I'm at a season where I can give more.
Yeah.
And I couldn't. One guy said to me, I couldn't wait to retire so I could serve more. It's not coming at the expense of his marriage or his family.
Right.
But for another guy to serve as much as that guy is, it could. Where you could say, hey, if this is getting in the way of healthy priorities, it's like, I haven't seen my family in 2 weeks because I'm at church 7 nights a week. That's probably not God honoring.
Right.
Nor is that going to teach your kids healthy priorities. And so it is a funny thing to think, oh, can I do too much church, or can I be too involved or too invested? But it probably is possible to get those priorities. I know years ago I heard a pastor speak at a conference, and he talked about choosing to cheat the church. And I think he would say this to anybody, but that day he was talking to pastors and to the guys that are hired to lead the church. He was basically saying there's only so much time in a day, and everyone realizes there's not enough time in the week, in the day, in your life to get everything you want done. And he said, a verse that we used was, Jesus promised to build his church. He never promised to build your family. So first of all, you got to have your priorities right. And and if you're going to choose one or the other to cheat, he was encouraging pastors to cheat the church, not in an unhealthy way, but just like to make his point so clear that you got to honor God first and your spouse and your kids next before any ministry commitment, whether you're a volunteer or a professional.
Yeah.
Not to say, serving or pastoring is not important. We should give it our all.
Right.
But not get it backwards as far as a list of priorities.
Yeah, early on in ministry, my dad he did a really great job of speaking into me wisdom, because he was seeing that I was being a total workaholic. He was a workaholic in ministry, so he throws himself into church work as a pastor, and is just like there's just never ending. There's no boundaries. There's no safeguards. It was just perpetual ministry. I picked up the baton from that. I saw that as a great thing. I was pouring myself into church work as a young youth pastor, and just absolutely loving what was happening, but coming home later and later. My wife was noticing, and the fact that my dad, 2,000 miles away, was noticing, was picking up on different things in how I talked. He called me out, and he confronted me. He said, Arol, you need to realize that you need to have a limit at the end of the day where you go home, because if you're waiting to go home for all the ministry to be done, you will never, ever go home, and you're cheating your family. And God's called you to be a minister to them. And so I think there's obviously two extremes. You could be someone has an unhealthy amount of time contribution to ministry programs, to the detriment of what God's called you to do in other areas of your life. There's also the other side of the equation of being so disconnected or unfaithful to your local church that you're barely showing up, and it's not one of the I think just big things. If you have a half-hearted commitment, you're going to have half-hearted results, and so that's the error on that side. And the one thing that I just growing up in a family that was committed to church and showing up every week, and then that's something that I've adopted both as a profession, but I'm encouraging it in my adult children, is that make that a part of your week. Start your week, at the church that you're committed to in your area. I want that to be that for them. I want to get to the end of my life and be able to look back on how every week of my life was a part of a gathering of believers where I had a chance to celebrate who God is, what He's called me to do, and have that reset moment of just breathing. And as someone who's been in church a whole lot of my life, if I was just going, I want to stay as committed as this is helpful to me in the time, or I want to stay as committed as much as I'm enthusiastic at the time, back to our original graph conversation, I'm never going to make that. I'm never going to come to the end of my life and see what all those weeks of discipline led to, how God impacted me, and also how God used me to impact others. And so I want to be that. I want to end well, finish strong, and let that church component of my life be something that's every single week. Yeah.
Yep. And man, the time that we do hang out with our small group, and the time that we get to serve, and that's where we found most of our best friends. That's where we found just a ton of encouragement and value. And so absolutely, we're in, and we're so glad to be in. So that pretty much wraps up kind of what we got the chance to talk about. You can always watch the sermons online You can even check out discussion guides, icebreakers, introductions, and some questions. Our small groups have been using those. You can use those around the family dinner table or at work or even on your own if you want. You can find those at missionbible.church. But we're glad you tuned in today, and we hope you have a great week, and we can't wait to see you this weekend.